right, guys. I'm Chris Hecker. I'm the head of glide for the U.S. ski team. I've been working with the team for about it's been my fifth year now. I've been on the World Cup since 2017. So 8 years on the World Cup, 5 with U.S. ski team, 1.5 with U.S. Biathlon, and then 1.5 with Rex Ski Wack. So I've been testing skis for a long time during the winters in different venues, different places, North America, Asia, Europe. Just generally been testing skis most winters for the last 8 to 10 years. Before the U.S. ski team, I was a graduate of St. Scholastica under Chad Somla, Maria Stuber. And then before that, I was at Anoka High School. But if you guys have questions at any time today, just raise your hand. I'll make sure to answer them as we go. That way you don't have to remember the questions at the very end. Today we'll talk about a little bit of structure, glide, and then some kick wax questions if you guys have them. But me being the head of glide, I want to focus more on that side of things for you guys, and we can touch base on some of the kick side of things, and I can answer those as we need to. It won't be a demonstration of how to scrape and brush a pair of skis. Everyone's kind of seen those clinics. I can tell you guys that you have to scrape the wax off and brush it out afterwards. I think everyone kind of understands that. What I want to bring to the table is some of the new waxes that are coming out, the changes that we've seen in the last 2-3 years with non-fluoral waxing, and then the up and coming different structure tools and how to use them and where to use them and when to use them. And so that's kind of what we're going to highlight today. I will start off with structure tools. So Pioneer Midwest was kind enough to borrow some tools for me. They have 2 kits, and these are the exact 2 tools that we use predominantly in the wax truck. There's only one here that I don't have, and it is the new Toko structure tool that has 2 different rollers in it, and they kind of create an X pattern on the ski, and they have different depths of it. That's a really popular tool for us because it's really safe. It's not an overly complex tool, messy, deep. It just ends up being a really kind of safe option, and I have some of that in here. Starting off with Red Creek, this is one of our less used tools, but it is still something that we use. They do their tools individually, and they are single use, or not single use, but one pass, and you can't interchange the bits out of these tools. So you have to keep buying different boxes and different tools. And what these will do is these will cut into the ski. So you're pressing weight down, and these blades here will cut. Whereas with a tractor box, which is from Speedy, so you'll see finite tractor boxes, Swix will have a tractor box, these will press into the ski, so creating a slightly different texture into the ski base. So pressing meaning more superficial, easier to pop out, but also easier to change. Cutting meaning a little bit deeper, a little bit more durable, but sometimes can pick up dirt. Structure tools, the more aggressive you go, the better it's going to work for wet snow. Everyone kind of understands that the coarser the structure tool, the more it's going to work for wet. The other problem you have with coarse tools, if you go too coarse, it can pick up a lot of dirt. So that it's opening larger cavities into the ski base. It'll pick up dirt, it'll slow down quite a bit over time. So you're on a given day, you're trying to balance out finding a coarse enough structure tool for the weather, but also finding something fine enough that's going to be fast and not pick up dirt. So if it's 50 degrees, you're using a different tool than if it's 30 degrees, than if it's 15 degrees versus 0 degrees. 99% of races, our team is using some type of hand structure on the ski. I haven't used a blank ski or no tool on a ski since 2022 winter. We had one race in Falloon that we didn't use a structure tool. Otherwise, every single race that you guys watch, that you guys have seen, we've used a structure tool in the last 4 years. So it is something that you can almost always find a structured tool or a pattern that works, but it's knowing the tools, figuring it out, because it can get really complex really fast. There's some rules that you can follow to make hand structure a little bit safer on day. So if you're not sure about the tool or about the pattern, the length that you run this structured tool will matter. The longer the pattern, the more surface area you have to pick up dirt, the more detrimental it can be for longer races. That being said, if you cut the whole ski with a structure tool, it can be faster. Essentially what it's doing is, if you have a linear grind, so straight line grinds, what the structure tool is, it's trying to break it up so that anytime you have particles or water or ice or snow coming through your grind, what it's doing is it's cutting that surface tension, that suction on the ski, and it's pushing it away out of the ski. So it's funneling it. It's similar to what your grooves will do into the ski, where it's breaking up that suction on the ski. So coarse tools like W7524, I know that sounds like a bunch of gibberish, but essentially it's going to be the amount of cuts in the width of this tool. So I'll pass a couple of these around. This would be the most coarse, and then line 15 would be one of the more fine ones. Well, this is the most aggressive. Oh, sorry. That's the most aggressive and the most fine tool in this box. Line 15, which you guys will see is one of the silver tools. It's what we call a broken linear. So a broken linear just has chevrons like this all the way down the ski. You'll have other structured tools that will be Christmas trees, chevrons, whatever you want to call them, and they'll trickle down in a V. The third type of tool is going to be a cross, which is this guy here. And essentially what it's doing is it's creating an X in the ski. Chevrons are going to be for more dry, new snow typically. Broken linears, so your crosses to the left or crosses to the right, are going to be for more sugar, artificial, man-made snow. You're going to see those ice chunks. So that's what it'll do, is it'll start pushing those ice granulars, those small little chunks of ice off the ski and away from the ski to glide a little bit better. And then your crosses or hashes are meant for more glazy, moist snow. So that would be that Toko tool that I was talking about that creates a nice little X, and it's just crossing back and forth in the ski, breaking up a lot of different humidity levels. Tools will typically have arrows on them. So the speedy tool here has a point or a chevron on there. Your red creep tools will have arrows on there. So they should be going from tip to tail. That being said, you can run structure tools backwards to even make a more complex structure on the ski. So you're combining some tools. I think in my head, I'm saying, a lot of you are asking, how do I know when to go backwards? How do I know when to go full length? How do I know when to go half length? That's where it comes down to testing, working with the tools, working with the skis. And if you're not sure, be safe. Go just half a ski. It'll help. It won't detrimentally hurt the ski, but you could if you went full length. So if you're like, maybe I want to add something, but I'm not sure what, you could do something finer. Because again, if you go more coarse, you can get slower, you can pick up more dirt. So add air on the side of finer and air on the side of shorter than longer. So half length skis or behind the full weight zone. So heel plate backwards is always a safe option for you. Let the grind of the ski do its job up front and let the hand structure and grind do the job in the rear. This is where most of your pressure is on the ski. This is where your body weight is versus up here. This is what's out in front of you. There's less going on up there. So the grind can handle this pressure point here, but having hand structure back here is far more important. So if you're looking for a safe option, covering this high weight, high pressure zone is going to be more beneficial for you. Speedy ski rollers. They come in a ton of different tools. So this box itself has 10 tools, including the 2 that are getting passed around. We have a box of about 50 to 60 different bits and tools. And then in that box, we're mixing 2, 3 tools at a time. So for a really warm condition, you'd see the W7524, you'd see U200, and then you'd see a U100. And you're like, what is that? You're just saying a bunch of numbers, but essentially what we're doing is we're combining a chevron full ski, and then we're doing a 2 mil linear down the center of it with a 1 mil breaking up the 2 mil. So it's just a bunch of straight lines on the ski, like it looks like this on the ski. And then you're breaking it up with a chevron down the middle. So every time a drop of water, so this would be for a warm, slushy day, every time a drop of water goes into that channel, it's getting pushed out by the chevron and into the next groove and then into the chevron. And so it's just kind of going up the ski at an angle and then off the ski or out of the ski. So it's helping reduce the amount of suction and friction in wet conditions.
In conditions like that, if I had Toko, the double barrel system, can I put the fine grain with 1 barrel and the warm barrel in the back and get the same thing?
So
or
that
do you prefer 2 separate passes?
I would prefer to do 2 separate passes with that. What it'll do is it'll make an asymmetric pattern to the ski, and that can be really bad with certain grinds. So if you have an asymmetric grind, so this ski would have an asymmetric grind. If anyone's wondering what that means, so you can see how it has a chevron to the right built into this grind. You don't always see something like this, but some people will make a grind that looks like it. But if you use an asymmetric structure tool with it, creating diamonds that are at one point kind of acute angles, and at the apex of that diamond, it's an obtuse angle, it'll not mesh well with these asymmetric grinds very well, and it'll just innately slow the skis down. A lot of the skis you'll see in the beginning level, so like your Delta Sports, your kind of Fisher SCs, your Solomon RC7s will typically have asymmetric grinds, so just pay attention for those like basic level skis, because then you know you have to be a little more cautious with what structure tools you use. Higher end skis are going to be more straight linear grinds, which will just look straight and it will look like a normal grind for most people. I will create a couple of different patterns on this ski to kind of show you guys what cold structured tools would look like versus warm ones. So with structured tools, the biggest thing is pressing even and light. You don't need to have this big amount force down, because again, it's going to press into the ski. It's going to cut in. The harder you push, the deeper it goes. So all you're doing on this ski, and if anyone wants to get closer and look, you guys can come up after I'm done pressing, but it's really light and I'm almost putting no pressure on the box and rolling. This is one of the just 2 mil linear tools. So it will look like I did nothing to this ski unless you get into the light and really look straight down the ski. We have certain tools which are back only to help with that that mitigation of water under this high pressure. That would be your linears typically. So 1 mils, 2 mils, and there's a couple of broken or like hashed linears, which you guys probably wouldn't have heard or seen, but it would be SP18 or S4 or X3, which come in the Speedy box every now and then, and they're the only brand other than SRB that would do that. That being said, typically classic linears in the tail is a good option, and then blending it with a chevron. So if we did a chevron tool in lazy conditions, remember that X pattern with your Toko tools. You can create an X with these tools as well that have a chevron. This is where that backwards motion comes from. And I'll pass this ski around when we're done. So you can look at the front half of the ski here is just going to have that chevron. It's going to help with a little bit more dry, fine snow. So new snow is typically what you'd see in there. But as new snow gets compressed under your bridge or the high pressure zone, it'll start to glaze and you need to start pushing away some of that moisture. So you'll see an X in the back and you'll see chevron in the front just with this Christmas tree or chevron patterned structure tool. So you can make a lot out of these tools if you guys want to pass that around a little bit. And the easiest way to look into it is with some light glaring onto it. And you can see the two different patterns, the rear tail and the mid part of that ski. How many of you have structure tools in your boxes for your teams? What structure tools do you guys use a lot of?
Toko.
Toko Home and Cool. Toko Home and Cool.
A little bit of Red Creek.
Red Creeks. Cool. We use, like I said, quite a bit of the Toko Home and Cool mouse type tools for the glazy snow. And then we'll use the Red Creek tools more for the dry snow. And then everything else will be used with the Speedy tools just because of how many different tools we can get from them. If I will pass these around as well, feel free to open up the box, look through the tools. If you guys have questions as I pass them around, just let me know. But you can see why this is a big part for us, but we also have the time to test 50 to 60 different tools at a time. Pass the Red Creek ones around as well. I think they're about $700, $800 for a box of 7 tools. So you can imagine what a box of 60 tools is going to cost. But they get pretty expensive.
Usually, right, that's the if we had more time, like what's the process we go through to test structure?
So we had a question on how we test structure, how we get structure out of the skis, and how would we manage it with only 4 pair of test skis or 2 pair of test skis? Because if you have 8 tools, how do you pick? How do you put it on 2 pair of skis, and how would you go about testing it? It's a hard answer. It always comes back to knowledge and what you're comfortable with using and what you've used in the past. You kind of always inevitably fall back to safe options. So for our team, I'm going to say that we use 8 pair of skis for structure. If we had to, so on a day like city sprints, we don't get much course access. We don't get much time. We have about a half an hour to do glide, kick, structure, ski picking. So we don't use our full 8 pair of skis. We end up doing a 4 pair fleet or a 2 pair fleet. And we just inevitably go down and say, hey, these tools we know are going to work. We're going to start bringing our tests down to, we're not going to try and find this one niche thing that's going to work and just be like, this is going to knock it out of the park, because that one niche wax might also be terrible. And if we pick 4 waxes that are super volatile or 4 structure tools that can be extremely volatile, you might not have found anything. You might have found one that would be really good, but the chances of you finding something so unbelievably fast and that small of a sample size is unlikely. So what we would do if you only had 4 pair of skis is you'd find 2 or 3 of the safest options you can. You're like, I know this is going to be okay. It's not going to be bad by any means. And if it wins, awesome. If it wins by a lot, awesome. So I would stick to the tools you'll feel comfortable with, learn them really well, And then as you feel, okay, this one always wins in the glazy, this one always wins in wet, then you can start getting one tool, two more tools, and say, okay, I need to mix it up. This one always wins. What can I do differently in this condition? So it's testing. It's getting out there on those 4 pairs of skis, even at practice, like training with the kids. Doesn't mean you can't be testing yourself in that 1 hour. You can get skis ready for yourself and you're going to be skiing with the kids at times, but you can also test while you're coaching. Going up the hill, going down the hill, you can get a feeling for skis, and sometimes it's you got 3K in today while coaching and videoing and whatnot, but 3K is enough to be testing some stuff at practice.
What's the life of one of those structure tools?
The bits,
The bits, yeah.
yeah, so the bits will last as long as you take care of them because you're pressing into a fairly soft material. They can dull out over time. That's still okay because a dulled tool will change the characteristics of it. So instead of a sharp cut V, you're now getting a dull like cut or U shape in it. So when before these big structure boxes used to come out, there used to be the Super Riller from Swix. And if anyone remembers, it's just a piece of metal that looks like a file, and it would just cut lines right into the ski. The original tools on the World Cup, we would file those down or sand those down so that some of the tools would be V's, some of the tools would be U's. So I have one in the Speedy Tools box, which when it gets passed around, I'll pull out, but that would create different structure patterns in the ski. So as they get dull, they don't necessarily wear out, but just give you a different characteristic of what it should work for or work with. So when we get a new tool to replace an old tool, we'll still keep the old tool because it'll work different than the new one, even though it's the exact same pattern, exact same cutting shape. It's just that cutting surface is no longer in a V like your kitchen knife. It's now in a U like a dulled kitchen knife. And that'll change the characteristics of it. So we'll test sometimes an old tool versus a new tool on our skis. Getting structure out, that can be a pain in the butt sometimes. Like truly, it takes a lot of time and a lot of manpower to get structure out of the ski. So to get this structure out, what we end up using is just CH5. And we'll pass over it a couple of times, scrape it off, and then we'll put CH5 on again. Sometimes in the warmer conditions, it'll take more to get those deeper, more aggressive structure tools, and there's no cheat or like quick way to get it out, unfortunately. And I wish there was just a way that you could just run it through a roller and call it good. But unfortunately, it can take 1 or 2 passes with a harder wax. And the reason why we use a harder wax is when you iron it, what it'll do is it'll harden more and it'll pull up a little bit more of that superficial structure so that when you scrape, you're actually knocking off a micro layer of this ski base. So that kind of grayish, blackish color when you're scraping off certain waxes, that's part of that ski base coming off. And then as your skis get more used and more brushed and more scraped, they tend to get those concave, convex, and it's time for a stone grind. The reason why it's getting that kind of hard to iron surface is because it's no longer flat. Because of scraping, because of heating, you can make them flat again by stone grinding. So structure skis, we have our own fleet, but it gets ground probably 2 to 3 times a year because of how much we're testing. And we need to get them flat again because we're heating them up and then putting structure on them, heating them up and putting structure on them. But yeah, CH5 is typically what we use. And if it's more fine, colder tools, we'll scrape once and we'll take a look. And if I had scraped this ski and said, yep, there's still structure in here, then I'll put another layer on, do it again.
So is there, because this seems quite common, is there one structure that would kind of be a universal structure?
I would go with the Toko or the home impulse tool. Mostly because it's the safest tool. If you have one tool and you're just gonna say, we're gonna use
It's
this,
just one structure, that's all we.
Yep.
'Cause I got 60 skiers.
Yep.
I'm not gonna start. Oh,
so that tool, the Holman pole or the Toko tool, is something that's in every single one of our tests. So coming back to that safe option that I was talking about in our test, that is our safe option. No matter what, that tool is never gonna be horrible, but it'll never.
Might be not be the most.
Exactly. But it's always gonna be in our test, because it does win quite often for us. And it's one of the cheapest tools that you can get is, and not cheap as in. Like flimsy, just cheap as in everything else is really expensive in this market, in this industry.
So that's the Toko.
Rilling tool, it has,
Toko rule.
yeah, it's the brand new one that they came out with last fall. And then Holman Cole does the same thing with their blue box. And they have a rolling tool. But essentially it just has 3 different bits in it. And you put those bits in and it creates an X pattern onto the same.
Excellent, thank you.
Any other structure? Yeah.
So following up on limited testing opportunities, but in your case, at the scale that usually it's not a limited tech testing, more about the extension, but no. But let's say World Cup almost always begins in Ruka, Finland, and you've been there 3 or 4 times, how much of your own historical knowledge or institutional knowledge comes in handy to simplify or eliminate things that may not work in 2024, 25 into big incident month?
Yeah, I mean, we have a full database and test sheets from previous years, but it also comes down to the condition, because some days in Ruka, it's 8 degrees, 5 degrees, and some years in Ruka, it's raining and 40 degrees. And so when you get to Ruka, there's maybe only 3 or 4 previous years that are the same. So you take that knowledge and you're like, all right, these tools won, let's get these into the test for sure. And then since those days that we had, maybe the last 3 tests in this condition at this time period was from 2018, 2014, and 2012. Well, things have changed a lot since 2018 as our most recent year. So we're still not going to throw that data out. We'll put a few of those things in, and then we'll start putting in some of the new tools as well. So it's really hard to say last year this tool won, so it's going to win again this year, because the conditions will change. They'll pull the stored snow out. They'll get more natural snow. So like the variables from year to year are so different, even at the same venues year after year after year. It's still just all the humidity stuff and all the variables combined. You can get some good guidelines, but it's never verbatim the year prior or 2 years ago was identical.
The Holman tool specifically, where do you find success with one roller versus the 2 together for X?
Almost always use 2 rollers. I have yet to take a roller out and have it be better than both rollers in there. So if you have like a 1 mil, or a 1.5, 1.5, or a 2 and a 2, it's almost always better than just a 2 in the back and a blank in the front.
I have a data question. How do you organize input and manage and make the data accessible to you all?
So we have a newer helper, Franklin. What is his position over at US Ski and Snowboard?
So maybe just reiterate the question. And I'll
So the question was about data input for us and how we use the data from year to year, and who collects it, how do we collect it?
So US Ski and Snowboard has an IT department that is their focus on tracking athlete performance as well as, like ski performance. So probably not something that everybody's going to have access to, but yeah, they at least, I think the general premise is, maybe take some notes, have a notepad and get comfortable with a handful of things. I would like, and I hope you don't mind, Chris, for me to kind of chime in here, but like, why hand structure? And yeah, some of these tools are expensive, but the cool thing about this, especially in a fluoro-free environment, first of all, hand structure always makes the skis fast. Rarely ever doesn't if you get, like, it's gonna make your skis faster. And it's, like, once you have the equipment, it doesn't go away. You know, it's not like once you put the wax on and then it's gone, you have to buy more wax. Like, this is a good investment, which is gonna have a return on investment, the more you kind of like, so that's why, like, if you're a high school program or a collegiate program and you're thinking about like a budget, I would strongly encourage you to look in the direction of hand structure, because you might very well find that this is a lot more cost-effective method to routinely get fast skis than just always chasing tons of waxes. So maybe have a small handful of waxes and then have a little more investment in hand structure. So just,
Agreed.
yeah.
Kind of for interest's sake, how many variables do you track when testing?
So the question was, what variables do we track while testing? Snow humidity levels, snow temperature, air temperature, age of snow. So whether it's new falling snow or 2-week-old snow or stored snow. And then venue, so altitude, elevation, while we're there. So we're tracking all of these different variables in that range. And they all have an impact. When you're at higher altitudes versus lower altitudes, you get different snow types and different snow crystals, as well as different humidity in the snow.
And then like date and time of day.
Yeah, date, time of day. There's also a note section for when the snow actually, or when the sun actually hits the race course for us. So when we come to that venue next year, and if we have a race at noon on February 2nd, we know that if we have a race on February 3rd next year in the same venue, that the sun's going to hit that spot at noon. Whereas if the air temperature is 40 degrees and the snow temperature is 28, once the sun hits, that snow temperature is going to skyrocket up. But until the sun hits it and it's in the shade, it's going to stay pretty cold. So we need to know when the sun's going to hit the course as well. So just keeping a log of that stuff after every test is important for us to track some of that minute data.
So you have a course that's like 50% sun, 50% shade. How do you balance picking structures and waxes?
We'll try to aim for both and test in both areas. So Ruka, or not Ruka, but Lahti is a really good example of that. They have two different courses. They have an east course and a north course, or a lake course and a non-lake course. The lake course is super humid, glazy, and the north course, or on top of the hill, is super dry. So we actually have two different teams at two different spots, or we'll send one team from the north and they'll take the best two up there. Maybe that's the most important section of the course that we really want to plan for fast skis. Maybe it's hillier, or maybe it's faster on the downhills, whatever characteristics you want to aim for to have better skis. We'll take the best two from that area and ski it down to the other side and make a final decision. Because sometimes you could have a really close finish up on one side of the course, bring those two over, and maybe one of them is clearly better on the other side, and then that makes the decision really easy. But just part of it, most of it is planning for which side of the course you would like to excel on, and then confirming on the other side of the course.
Do you have to zero out after each test? Or does a structured ski have a life, or day 1, day 2, day 3?
So we will zero out our fleets multiple times a year before major events. So we do predominantly glide outs. We don't do any like speed traps. We do partnered glide outs, and essentially we'll put CH6 on all of them, make sure that they're clean and zeroed out with the same waxes, maybe 2 layers of CH6. And then we'll glide them out, and we'll see how different my glide out is versus my partner's glide out as we swap skis. We did 16 pair of brand new test skis in Ramsau, and our biggest difference was like 10 centimeters. So about this big across 16 pair of skis. So that's a pretty decent zeroing side of things, because if you put a wax on, it could be 80 centimeters, 100 centimeters, or structure. Some days will be 200 centimeters, 300 centimeters. So having a difference of 10 is 0 for us. But we'll do it before major championships, like Tour de Ski, World Championships, beginning of the season, to make sure that nothing has changed from the winter time. If we go through and zero out our skis and they're not the same, we will send them out to get reground. So we'll just totally flatten them, blank them, retest them. And if they get retested and they're still not the same, then we'll just order a new fleet and sell that one as a individual ski. There's a lot of people that want skis, so. Any other structured questions?
It seems like so much of learning what works and picking the right structure has a lot to do with reading the snow.
Mhm.
And I think we use a lot of terms like transform, glazed, icy, coarse, corn. And there's a lot of it where I feel like I know what that means, but when I talk to some of my fellow coaches, we actually don't agree over that. Is there a way that you guys standardize that or help you get to a more consistent interpretation of what the snow is to help you figure out what those go-tos are?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. On our sheet, we actually have granular sizes that we could measure out, or at least eyeball, like salt, like sea salt. Or is it sand where it's just really fine, dry snow? So we'll use more like practical terms for describing rather than transform, because transform is ambiguous. But we can use flour or sand or things that are like powdered sugar is really easy to describe the snow types. And so inside the truck, we will talk about it, but we all use the same terms. Whereas if you're talking to Norway, they probably don't describe the snow as floury or sugary. They probably describe it as 0.1 millimeters or 0.3 millimeters. So and the next team could be using something totally arbitrary as well. So it can be hard to talk about it from coach to coach or team to team. But inside your team, as long as we're using the same terminology, everyone understands.
So imagine you have 4 or 8 pairs of skis that you're testing. Skate day, make it easy. Do you prep the ski completely, including the structure, and then go do some glide outs, or do you test glide out and pick like 1 pairs with no structure on, and then you apply structure and pick 2 from there or 1 from there, or how is the testing for the all?
Is that for the athlete ski or for the test ski that you're okay? So we're asking about how do we pick athlete skis and when do we apply our race waxes and structure. The athlete skis all get picked with what we call an overnight wax. So the night before the race, I will pick out something I know is going to be a safe option for that day. Everyone in the truck will apply that same wax to their skis. And some days, like a skate day, Jesse will be testing 8 pair of skis, and Gus will be testing 8 pair of skis, and Rosie will be testing 8 pair of skis. But on a classic day, they're only testing maybe 4 at the most, maybe 2 even if it's like just a straightforward day. But those 8 pair of skis will all get that overnight wax to make sure that they're all cleaned and zeroed so that we can go into tomorrow's race morning, brush them out, scrape them off, whatever it might be, and then test them like we would our waxes on our test plates. We're going to assume that these are going to have differences in them, and whichever difference is the biggest is the one that we're going to pick as the winner, or leave the top 2. So we're going to take the best. Me and say Jason would go out and test 8 pair of Jesse's skis before the race, narrow it down to 2, and this is maybe 2 hours before the race, narrow it down to 2, and then him and Jesse would go, Jason Cork and Jesse would go out and ski for a little while and make sure that all the way around a loop, like a 2K loop, a 3K loop, that they pick which ski is better. Because if we test 3 hours before the start, what's to say that the conditions won't change a little bit by that time? So we do a pre-test, and then we actually go out with our athletes and confirm one or the other for our skis. And then we'll go back inside and start waxing for that race day side of things. That is what we can do with the amount of resources that we have. A lot of you guys are maybe just one person, and it's hard to take care of 60 athletes on a race day. So how do you combat that the most? Overnight waxes. Pick a safe option the night before, And now you can really focus on ski picking if you have athletes with ski pick abilities. Because ultimately picking the correct ski is going to be more important than hand structure and wax sometimes. But if they have one ski, then you can focus a little bit more on wax and structure. So it kind of depends on what you have as a team and what kind of racing you guys have. Can you focus more on wax and structure because all of your athletes only have one pair of skis? And that stuff you should be able to apply 2 hours before the race. Or do you have a team that needs to ski pick and has a fleet of skis to pick from? Because then you don't spend as much time with wax and structure, and you might have to go more towards ski pick or helping narrow down some ski picking side of things.
So the night before junior race, if they're prepping their ski for kids, we have to say 20 kids. The common thing that I've come to learn is if it's only hard paraffin wax, you apply scrape, brush, polish, then put the structure, it's fine. But if the recommendation calls for a liquid paraffin wax, you apply the structure and then spray the liquid paraffin on top of it. Is that does that matter? Does the order matter at that level?
So the question was whether or not the application of liquids matter when using structure tools. And the answer is yes, a ton. The reason being is if you're using structure tools like we have talked about, it's cutting into the ski. And if you were to use your liquid first, brush it out, and put on your structure tool, what you're doing is you're cutting a fresh section of base material open that has never been waxed again. So now you have this base material that hasn't had any wax on it. That'll collect a lot of dirt. It'll collect a lot of water. It'll harm the ski to have a fresh open base material there without treating it with something. So what we tend to do is we will put structure on top of our final ironed layer. So we'll iron something in, scrape and brush it out, and at this point we'll no longer have any heat hitting the ski to pull that structure out. So then we'll put a liquid on top, or maybe it's one of those like Wold-On blocks, but we're putting something on top of our structure every single time we use it because we don't want to collect dirt. We don't want to collect surface tension and water. So we're always putting something on top of a structured ski. Ready for some wax talk? My area. All right, I brought just a small amount of wax, even though it might look like a lot. These are some of my favorites, some of the stuff that we use quite a bit of, and these are some of the safe options that we have access to on the World Cup. That being said, it's not everything. Our team, we end up partnering and working with several wax brands to develop new products. So the new Toko jet liquids. I'm not sure if anyone's seen it in the US, and if you have, it was probably at nationals, like junior nationals at the very end of last season or in the preseason orders this year. I don't have those with me. I have the high performance liquids from them. These were really good, solid waxes for us, especially this one. This one we have raced on a ton in the past. Sprayed on, let it dry, go out and ski. The Toko yellow and then the new jet liquids in the blue and the red, which I don't have, are really good as well, of just sprayed on the ski, let it dry for 15-20 minutes, go out and ski.
Do you prefer spraying straight onto the base versus onto like Fiberine and then rubbing onto the base?
You can do one or both. We just tend, as for ease of use, we will just spray onto the ski and then spread with Fiberine. And that'll help with getting a really thin layer, which will dry faster. With liquid waxes, with any wax, you're just trying to get the thinnest layer on you can, because that's inevitably you're going to brush off because you're just coating the ski. The thicker the layer is not going to be faster. Ironing is just melting it into a liquid state, letting it dry by cooling, scraping and brushing by getting rid of as much of it as you can. That's the same premise of liquid waxes, is you're spraying it on, spreading it across, letting it dry, brushing it out. So the general concepts are there, you're just using different sources of carriers, so heat by an iron, butane as a solvent. Some of our other favorites from Star with an isopropyl solvent, so just carrying different waxes in different ways. Toko liquids, super important for us. That was always been a fairly safe option for us.
Earlier with the Tokos, when you said spray it on, let it dry and ski, are you saying that you don't brush or anything before skiing, or?
Good question. We typically use like a wool to just brush it out, and then we'll go ski from there. So the wool will act as our brush.
Chris, can you just define, like, just explain wool, just so that people know?
I'll do that post wax.
Okay.
We'll do tools as another
Okay.
subject. That'll be another long one. I have a feeling. This is probably one of our favorites, X cold powder. Everyone knows it. It's one of the original Toko waxes in the new packaging. Funny story about this one. This actually won a silver medal at the Olympics. Even though we could use florals at the Olympics, we ended up using Toko X cold powder that day. That Jesse was second at the Olympics. That was kind of fun. In a fully floral world, we could use some non-floral waxes that were still fast. So that was a really kind of special case with wind-blown, dry, squeaky, dirty snow. It ended up being faster than a lot of the floral powders that we had that day. And we had used it the day prior when Scott Patterson was 6th or 8th or whatever it might have. I think it was 8th, because that was the best finish for a male at the Olympics. But yeah, Toko X cold powder, really solid wax for us in those really cold, dry conditions. More funny stories. HS liquids. These things are really, really good. They're also cheap. They're $40 for a container of this. This is a wax that we used. That was a 3rd place finish this year. This one, we had a win on this one this year. We had a win on this one this year. And this one I have not used, but I brought it in. But these are cost-effective, good waxes that I find to work typically in more just new snow. So glazy new snow, they can work really well. And they're in that cost-effective side of things.
You love them better than the TS?
So with the Swick side of things, the way that their lines work, PS, HS, TS. PS has no additive, HS has a little bit of additive, TS has a ton of additive in a generalized sense. Some of the TS doesn't have additives in it, but that's how I've worked with their racing service team and some of their chemists. The newer the snow, the less the additives work. The older the snow, the better the additives work from this brand specifically. So in those newer snow days, I find that PS and HS is going to work better than TS. And then in the dirtier days or the more coarse grained snow, TS might work a little bit better. It's still something we are trying to work out, but that's our current hypothesis, is if we're trying to narrow something down or pick something out, we're going to look at that snow type and try to narrow it down from there. So for those that have big teams that need some cheaper waxes, it's a really good option. This is one of the brands that we work very closely with. So like I had talked about at the World Cup level, we get to work with brands kind of hand in hand. This is a brand that we have, I think starting this fall, you'll start to see some of like our collaborative mixes with Swix come out. So they have some brand new products that myself and their research and development team invented last year and used throughout the season. You guys will hear more about that when we can actually talk about it, but they have some new stuff coming that was really cool. So good budget friendly waxes, and then like you had mentioned, TS. So that's why these are here, is to talk about the TS versus HS. TS more old snow, HSPS, more new snow. Typically. Powders. Good base layers. TSP5 has been one of a good, just really hard, as you guys know. Really hard base layer for stuff. When it's cold and you need a safe option in that cold temp, TSP5 is a really solid option for you. They have the Marathon powder, which is right here. It's also a good alternative, but I find that in the most of the conditions, you can find one of the numbered TSPs to work better than Marathon. But Marathon is a safe option if you don't have time to test. It'll never be bad in any condition, but it might not win in those same conditions. So if you don't have time to test Marathon, if you do have time to test, try to go for a numbered one. Let's talk a little bit about Rex. This is the second brand that we have worked with in the past. And this is a line of powders that we invented last fall with the USD team. So I have about 30 different renditions of these, and these are the 6 that ended up coming out to production side of things. The first month of racing, as you guys saw last year, we ended up having some special skis in certain spots, and it was due to a lot of these test waxes from both Swix, Star, Rex that we've been working with that nobody else had access to. With the new non-floral side of things, that's what you're seeing this rapid evolution of non-floral waxes. Swix is always on the cutting edge of that side of things, and you'll see that in a month or two here with their new lineup of waxes that complements the iron-ons from Rex. So we were using a lot of these iron-ons and liquids in conjunction with each other. So kind of cool to have some friends in the industry that are willing to work with us and partner with us, and then give us an exclusivity for a few months. And then obviously they're also trying to make some money and making some products, so they need to release it at some point. It can't just be exclusive to the US ski team, as much as I wish it could be. But yeah, so these guys have 6 different powders. 2 of them are the base waxes, so they have a black and a white. Black for new snow, white for old snow. Really good, hard, durable layers. So if you're marathon racing, 20K racing, these are a pretty good staple product for us as far as a durable layer. They work warm, they work cold because of them just being innately hard. They'll be durable. We almost never race on them alone, but they're a good durable layer underneath everything. That's when you come into the special side of things, the numbered side of things. So again, it's like Marathon and the numbered, similar to the numbered Marathon. Numbered side of things is going to be more oriented at conditions. So NFX 41, dirty, snow, warm or cold. It's just, again, really hard, but the additive in here that's black is going to push away dirt. Same additive in the 11, but a softer paraffin. So it works for more wet snow when it gets slushy. 21 and 21G are going to be your kind of staple Rex Blue. If anyone knows Rex Blue, this is going to be that same similar condition, but it's going to be revamped. The last brand that we work very close with in product development is Star. So if you guys have seen some of the new Star stuff from this season, which again, you guys probably saw last year at the end of the year at the Nationals, which would be the long distance racing, which is a green box. And they also have a 0B liquid, which I couldn't get my hands on because it's sitting in Europe at the moment. But these are going to be a lot of your safe options for cold and dry stuff, the cold liquids, polar liquids. If you're looking for one safe option or two safe options from these guys. Med, cold, and polar are always gonna be near the top, so if you have them in your box, test them, because they are great durable waxes. Same with the powder side of things. A lot of what we're seeing throughout the continuity of a brand is iron on a powder, put on a liquid. Iron on a powder, put on a liquid. Iron on a powder, put on a liquid, iron on a powder, put on a liquid. So it is very common practice right now to have something ironed underneath your liquids. Sometimes we don't, but most of the days we do.
And then is it better to stick within all brands families to match powders and liquids, or do more mixing and match?
So for a team that has a low budget, or a team that just wants to learn more, stay in the same family. The reason being is that once you master that family, then bring a second family. But you have to know where it's gonna work, why it's gonna work, when it's gonna work, before you can start bringing in this one wax and this one powder, and you're like, this combination works every time. You're like, but why? How? Is it just this is so good that you didn't even need this? Is this so good you didn't even need this? But if you know, like, when you start to learn about it, you're like, this one works really good in cold, dry, wind-blown snow, and this one works when that wind-blown snow starts to glaze a little bit. You can start to mix families around, but right now, and it's always been something that when I give a clinic, it's really important is to just get familiar with one brand first and then start branching out. If you don't have an affiliation with something, or if you're just super new and you're starting with a fresh box and you're like, cool, I can't wait to build it out, the same philosophy should still stand. I think you can make super competitive skis just using 6 waxes from Toko. Swix, you're gonna need 6 to 8 waxes. From Star, you can do it with 3 waxes, 4 waxes. Same with Rex. It can be 3 or 4 different waxes, and you can make a super solid ski wax box. And it sounds crazy that you can make a good wax box out of 4 waxes, but I can guarantee you can. When it comes down to it, like, if I was gonna start up, it would be hard for me to pick which brands to just say this is where I'm gonna start, because there's so many good things about it right now, and it would come down to how much time I have to test in the region I'm in. But yeah, does anyone have questions on some of these, or does somebody starting up a new wax box?
The question, because I see like powder and the liquid, is it the industry like moving away from the wax? Or
Sort of. The industry is using more additives, and the additives are not as soluble in a block form. So when you melt on blocks, you'll see these like weird color mixes in there where like some of it's white and some of it's blue, or some of it's white and some of it's green. It's because that additive isn't exactly mixing. But in a powder form, it doesn't need to mix. It'll be an equal ratio in there when it goes on to the ski. And then you're melting it to mix it in rather than trying to cran it on, because when you're cranning it on, you're maybe getting more additive than paraffin. In the powder form, it's just easier to mix some of those with under your own iron rather than at a factory in a press.
but the block is the same as the powder and or no, like.
Blocks and powders have almost nothing in common other than just the conditions that they would be tested in or used for. So like HS6 is different than PS6, which is different than the TSP6 as far as the additive and content of paraffin.
The same concept applied, please apply blocks, or are they gonna have less additive as well?
Yeah.
Is that where I see more liquids on the table, the please apply block?
Yeah, so just from our experience, we've only had 2 or 3 fleece applied blocks we gonna test in the last 2 years. We're still testing them, we're still using them, but as far as a recommendation goes, I've used almost every single liquid that's on this table at some point during the year, some more than others, and I could feel comfortable using it. So these aren't the only waxes we have, but they're the ones I feel confident in and safe in.
Or do you go in the opposite camp of needing to build up a brand new wax box where you almost spend too much time trying to get it perfect? And I coach high school, so for most of our kids, it's they won't even notice a difference, we're just like hoping they finish and be upright for their first year.
Sure.
Is there a family recommend for like this western area, the snow, kind of a combination of hopefully natural and man-made, that wasn't the case last year, but a good starting point just to. Like, we're going for economics, we're going for speed to get 60 kids in and out as fast as possible and actually on the snow and confident in their abilities.
So if I'm gonna pick a singular family that I know that I'm gonna have the time to test. And the ability to have 6 to 8 pair out there. Swix is gonna be the family I'm gonna go to. If I don't have the time to test, if I don't have the ability to do that, and I just need to go with something that covers a huge range. Really broad, really specific. I would go here, either Star or Rex. They're just, it's really simple. It's 3-4 waxes on the liquid side, 3-4 waxes on the powder side. Mix and match them all to make 16 different combinations for 16 different conditions.
Okay.
The reason why I picked the Swix side of things, if you have the ability to test, is that they have both those niche waxes I was talking about that can be really fast, but they also have some safer options as well. So the hard part for me is knowing exactly which ones to test and which ones are going to be the safe ones that day and which ones are going to be the fast ones that day. Our super good example is APU and Eric Flora. They only use the Swix lineup, but they test 8 to 10 different combinations every single day. And they make really, really good skis with one brand. And that's all they'll test is the blocks. They'll test the melt-ons, they'll test the liquids, because there's so many products. There's 6 to 8 different liquids, there's 6 to 8 different powders, there's 6 to 8 different melt-on blocks, and it's hard to know, is it a block day, is it a powder day, is it just a liquid day, is it the fleeced on block day? And that's where I have a hard time figuring that out some weeks. Whereas with these guys, it's like, all right, it's definitely glazy out, so it's gonna be med and it's gonna be the blue. It'll be safe option. I know it'll be competitive. I'm sure that there's something in the Swix lineup, but if I don't have the time to test, it's really hard to say which one it's gonna be. Yeah.
Not sure, after 2 rounds or decide on powder, or do you actually go away or?
So the question was, after structure, do you iron in or do you use something else? Our philosophy is that your last layer of heat, so powders, blocks, you scrape and brush that out, then structure, and then a non-heat applied wax. So a liquid, fleeced on block, a corked on thing that doesn't have a whole lot of heat. And the reason being is that we don't want to get rid of that structure by adding heat. That's how you get rid of hand structure, is heat. So avoiding heat at all costs once using structure. Does anyone have waxes on this table that, or don't have waxes on this table that they are wondering about or want to know
We've
about?
Start before,
Mhm.
and I'm wondering if you have any insight on what's gonna happen to Start.
There's a lot that I know that I can't say. I know that they have a full line of waxes for this season in the US, minus the liquids. The current status is that they have a buyer lined up for the brand. And so it should be business as usual in a year. But like any business that went out of business, is that they have to sell the current inventory to pay off bills, and then they start building up a new line, or they restart the production line. So my guess is the blocks, the melt-ons, all of that stuff, the liquids will stay the same, is my understanding. But it might take a little bit longer to see some of the liquids, but I think all the iron-on stuff is serviceable, and it'll be in the country for the entire year.
Could you elaborate a little more on how you approach durability for like a 30 or a 50K?
Yeah, so me and as some of you guys might know, Eli Brown, he's a Midwest guy. Him and I did a ton of durability testing this last year, especially at the Berkey. On Tuesday, we did a 50K, on Wednesday, we did a 50K, on Thursday, we did a 50K, on Friday, we did a 30K. Specifically for the birthday. We were doing a ton of durability testing, trying to figure out, is 8 layers of wax better than 4 layers of wax, better than 2 layers of wax? And ultimately, what we ended up finding out is that at a certain point, it doesn't matter what you had on the skis, they're all slow. The goal is to be faster at that endpoint or throughout the cycle, because at that endpoint, everything was just, it was slow. So the first 10K, we didn't see a huge drop off. After the first 20K, we didn't see a huge drop off. 25K, we saw a big drop off, 30K, and then everything started to like plateau. It's like, all right, this is all back to 0 again. But yeah, so what we ended up finding out is the safest option is if you're doing a 30K or a 50K, something really hard overnight or the day before is going to be important. It's going to harden the base. It's going to be a really important piece of that durability. After that, it comes down to structure. You got to find something that's pretty fine. If you go too aggressive, so that Toko tool, the home and pull tool that people have had, that's a really great tool of fine but fast. Reason being, it's not going to pick up much dirt. And then it's finding a liquid or a fleeced on block that's also hard. That's the downfall with a lot of those fleeced on blocks. They're so soft because they need to get applied to a fleece and then applied to the ski. They have to be gummy. They feel fast. But the liquids, you can have something harder on the inside. So hard base paraffins and harder liquids with finer structures is kind of what we found for durability. 4 layers of wax versus 8 layers of wax really didn't do much for us. The ski bases are already treated. They're already really hard. So if you're going from like a, let's say a CH8, CH10, a really soft gummy wax, then you could probably see 8 layers of wax work better, but that's because you're hardening the base and it has less to do with the amount of layers you put onto the ski. The other thing can be said about freshly ground skis. 8 layers of wax before the night before the race is probably going to be better on a freshly ground pair of skis because you're hardening the base. That base is really soft at the moment. So that's always the goal with distance racing, is hardening the base properly with hard waxes. That's why the marathon is so good. That's why the Sisu waxes are so good, is because they're really, really hard waxes and they help harden the base further.
Any thoughts on like roadie endurance?
Roadie endurance can be a good one. My only like downfall with it is for an endurance or a marathon type wax, it's pretty soft. Okay. And so I don't feel like it does a good enough job as far as a base layer goes, but it can be a good or a decent top layer. That being said, we don't use a lot of ironed on stuff for top layers because we're also using structure. It's hard to layer that on. So it's more of a niche wax for us that can work, but we find other stuff that's typically faster.
Going back to structural plus the waxing. Could you explain the difference between like given a race, like more of us laughter, because their experience comes from how the structure, what you put on or not put on at all is different from when Brian and Matt and Caitlin and Elena ski versus somebody like me skis that takes twice as long. Not the structure map in our cases.
For sure. I mean, if you want to, I mean, outside of what they're doing, I mean, structure is always going to help you. Similar to what Brian had said, it's like, it's always going to help. It's almost never going to hurt you unless you really, really dig deep into the ski or just pick the wrong thing on a given day. But if you want to be an hour faster, even if it's the difference between 7 hours and 6 hours, I'd pick 6 hours, and it will matter. If performance isn't an issue, or if you don't care about the performance, which is not a big deal to a lot of people, then even the wax, I mean, it's not gonna, why wax at that point?
Follow-up would be like, does it ever become the same race, but based on how long they take versus how long they take, will it ever become such a clear problem of they're trying to solve the problem of friction, I'm trying to solve the problem of suction? Does it ever become that on any given day?
Yeah, I definitely think that waxes and skis will react differently to slow speed versus high speed testing. There are days where we will focus on extremely high speed testing because of the downhill. So Ruka is a prime example of where we're getting up to 40-50 miles an hour on a pair of skis some days in the tracks. They're icy, they're glazy, and these hills are fast. You always see that mass start in Ruka where on the downhills it kind of strings out because the drafts are so important and they're so high speed. We plan for that. That's that 50% in the shade, 50% in the sun. We're planning for these high speed downhills because we need to be in it. And if we're not, that slingshot and that draft can really get you up the next hill in Ruka. Other days when you're on flat ground, like in Dresden, we're doing really slow speed glide outs because it's flat, it's slushy, it's slow. We need to plan for that. So I do think that there's a huge difference in slow speed suction at warm temps versus high speed friction.
Can you just clarify on with the liquid, so for more for like 30, 40, 50K races, you put on a nice hard wax and you structure. Did you say that some of those liquid waxes are actually hard waxes, so they'll have much more durability than earlier liquid waxes that tended to have about a 50 durability?
Yeah, so the liquids now have gone a long way since before. The origin of this wax is actually, you can't put this into a block. You guys remember the old Stark Green, MF Green, pain in the butt to put on. If you put this into a block, it would be harder to apply. The melting temp is about 180 degrees for the paraffin. So your iron, just to get it to start dripping onto your ski, would be at about 180 degrees Celsius. And you're just like, man, this is brutal. But you can put it in a liquid and it dries and it's fast and it'll bond to that ski. So that's why like this wax is a really good option as far as like really hard layer that's going to be extremely durable for you. Man-made snow, really good option. So for the Berkey this year, Jesse, Gus, Scott, Flora Dolce, this is all they used. One layer of this the night before, one layer of this the morning of. That's all we did. 2 layers of wax for both of them, or for all 4 of them. Seemed to work okay.
For powder applications, how dense do you usually like to go with your powder on the ski before you iron it in?
About that much. So. We don't have, I mean, we have a budget.
Sure.
But it's more important.
It's always over budget. I should probably also, I can chime in here too, is like, so Chris was talking about some of these products, and as you can see, we use a variety of products. I would be remiss, our marketing department would be upset with me by saying we actually have a really good sponsorship through Swix. And so like for our development level, we use a lot of the Swix because we get so much from them. And as Chris said, we work with a handful of companies, but as he's saying, you know, we're able to like actually do product development with them, and we're unique with Swix. Like we're more exclusive with Swix than Norway is with Swix.
Correct.
Even though it's a Norwegian company, they sponsor us. They sponsor United States ski team more than any other team in the world.
And I work closer with them than any other wax brand in the world, and we get a longer exclusivity. We had an entire season of wax to ourselves last year. Nobody else in the world got that wax.
Yeah, so our relationship with Swix is not just with cross country, it's for all 10 of our sports. So because of that relationship, so I would be remiss by not saying that.
no,
Yeah,
it's-
so we have a pretty good relationship with them, but
It's-
with other companies as well.
It's really cool.
Thanks for showing that powder. So on that is, you just touch on ironing that in, is there a tapping on it or?
I'll just take an iron and just slowly go over it. So again, it's just because it's a powder does not mean it's like our floral powders that are just like, you need to tap them down first. You're gonna be able, they're more paraffin based, so they're gonna melt a lot easier than a lot of those pure florals that were just rock hard.
Just going over the sort of the light
Exactly,
initially,
Yep.
so it's not snow plowing it off.
exactly. Any other,
With your irons for the powders, do they have like the bevel at the start of them, so it kind of pushes it down a little bit?
so our irons, we use an IDT iron because it's integrated with the vacuum system in our truck and they do have a beveled edge to it. That being said, when we go to the Minneapolis World Cup or the Canmore World Cup, we don't get to bring those irons with us, so we were using other irons. What we'll end up doing is we'll actually sand all four corners of it so that it's rounded and beveled so that we're not snow plowing wax off. If it's a sharp 90-degree corner to the irons, a lot of the times it's scraping off that wax or pushing it away. So just beveling or just sanding and rounding those edges tends to be better for us. Some of the iron companies will have that like beveled edge to the back end of the iron or to the edges, which they'll round. So when looking at irons, that's two of the things I look for is rounded edges or a beveled edge of it that wax will tap down into.
While we're on irons, can you talk about ironing in one direction versus back and forth?
It doesn't matter.
You want it,
Just iron flat. Yeah, so the question was whether or not ironing back and forth or one direction matters. It doesn't matter. The skis, you're just melting the wax. Ideally, you can go back and forth, just don't heat it up so much that it's melting or heating warping the base. Forwards and backwards doesn't matter on an iron.
How about orientation of the iron, so long ways or short ways, any preference?
We're split probably 50-50 in the truck.
Okay,
Jason does it short side, I do it long side.
okay. That's good.
There was a hand over.
Yeah, I was just observing how often you guys were nailing the skis last year. It seemed incredible to watch. How many times I just watched the US skiers accelerate down a hill. And, I mean, obviously a lot of it is the fitness of the skiers and some of the other factors, but when you watch the skis accelerate, away from their competitors, and it's clearly something you guys are doing. So nice work. That's awesome to see. I'm curious, like, how much of that is being ahead of the floral curve, or I mean, obviously you have more data now as you guys get deeper in and collaborations with Swix. Yeah, how much of it is staying or being ahead of the floral ban, or what do you think played into that success?
So the question was about like kind of how far ahead we were last year and where is that attributed to? It is, I would say a lot of it is due to our collaboration with Swix and other brands. When those brands released products mid-season at Tour de Ski, our ski differences, our advantage definitely was decreased in the middle part of the season to the end of the season. Like I felt in the first 4 weeks of racing, we had some of the best skis that we've ever had in a 4-week span, when we had multiple podiums. And it was like, all right, cool. This is like, we're favored to go second and third in this race, which we've never been able to do. And then mid-season, it started to get like, all right, this is getting a little harder. Everyone's getting closer together. And then it got closer yet at the end of the season where it was like, all right, there's like no discernible difference. And everyone can say, yeah, we had great skis here, we had great skis there, but it's like, it was really hard to say whether or not we had any better skis in Finland and in Oslo and in Falun, like maybe 1 or 2 days that I can think of off the top of my head that we had like lights out skis, but the other days, I don't think we had anything better or special. I think we just had more special athletes at that time. the beginning of the season, I think we had both the athletes and the wax kind of all in one. And that was just attributed to the team and the athletes. But I do think that we had a huge advantage for those first month and a half with our brands. And then this year I hope to have the same because there's a lot of new stuff coming out again. But our pre-testing probably was half as much as Norway, Sweden, Finland. I mean, we had, truth be told, we probably had 3 weeks of non-floral testing going into last season total. I know that other teams have year-round wax techs and they have year-round developers that can be working 2-3 years ahead of time. And they have teams that have that time. They're going to the glaciers, they're doing ski tunnel testing, they're doing a lot of stuff that we don't do. But the in-season stuff we devote a ton of time to, and I think that was a part of our team and a part of our cooperation with some of the brands that we got exclusivity, but we're also working really hard at it at the beginning of the season. And then we also have a really good team, especially with like Brian leading the U23 trip. Like there's a lot of continuity and clarity between the World Cup team and that U23 team. When you saw them have really good skis and win a handful of medals there at U23s last year. So just that continuity between our team and an open dialogue has been super helpful for us. Just this in the last couple of weeks, we've discussed with like Stratton and Caldwell, got a meeting with Chris Mallory, Team Berkey and Aaron Manning. Like all of us are just collectively saying what worked for you, what didn't work for you, and we're all gaining this knowledge base to help us hopefully for next season.
Just do you mind if I make a comment?
Not at all.
I mean, this is pretty technical, but I just want to speak to the computer and speak to the audience. Like, I think if you take one thing from race support and like in tech, like service support, is like your job as coaches isn't to hit a home run every single race. Like your job is to provide just consistently good skis, and like I think, like just know like obviously having decent skis provides a good experience for your athletes, but like don't feel like you need to like spend so much crazy amount of time. I think if you take anything from what Chris is saying is like understand the system, understand kind of the general, like, okay, 1, 2, 3, I put down something, I iron it in, I put in some hand structure, and then I put something over the top of that. And like, and as Chris said, like kind of narrowing the products, but kind of like solidifying your process, I think is really, really a good approach to like just providing your athletes kind of consistent skis.
One thing Jason, my table mate, always says, and something that's always stuck with me is that you can never win the race for your athlete, but you can certainly lose the race for your athlete. So try not to lose the race and pick some safe options and let them go win the race. It's a partnership between your athlete and yourself, and giving them a safe, fast option is extremely important.
Is there a time when you are gonna hand brush and not roto brush? Any examples? Like
Race day when we need to have good brushing, we're using roto brushes, and in the mornings when everyone wants a calm morning and a quiet morning, we're using hand brushes. No, we use a lot of roto brushes. So that's a good segue into this kind of next topic is what roto brushes do you use? Why do you use them? How do you use them? So we use roto brushes on race day. We use roto brushes on non-race days, and we have hand brushes. But hand brushes are the roto brushes have gotten so good that you're not going to damage skis for most of the brushes. There are a couple of brushes that are a little scary, I'll give you that, but most of the brushes are safe to use. You can go unidirectional with, or bi-directional with the horsehair, the nylon brushes, it's no problem. Steel brushes, I would go one way. Brass brushes, we don't use. Copper brushes, we don't use on the roto side. It's steel, horsehair, nylon. Those are the three brushes we use. Nobody else in our truck has a brass or a bronze brush. It just, they're too aggressive and they tend to not do as good of a job as the steel brush does. The steel brush is soft. The bristles will bend instead of stick straight down. But we always get a better, more accurate brushing when we're using roto brushes. If we're hand brushing, maybe 8 passes is a lot different than 16 passes because of that. But a roto brush is going so fast and moving so much wax, it's already at a point where it's brushed. Hand brushes, you can't move your hands fast enough. So roto brushes always on race day. One, it's easier to use and faster, but it's also better. It just gives you a more uniformed and accurate finish to the ski. When we're brushing out our melt-ons, we have a steel and a horsehair brush on. And then we will use the steel one direction, horsehair will go back and forth. 3 passes usually. So steel, horsehair, horsehair. Done. Move on to the liquids, move on to the structure, whatever the next step is calling for. On the liquid side of things, we're using a horsehair and a nylon. Horsehair back and forth, nylon back and forth. Done. Use a little bit of Fiberine to get rid of that excess dust or residue. Bring the skis to the start line. Don't overcomplicate it. Brushing isn't going to be that thing that makes or breaks your day. Over brushing, if you're sitting there for a minute, that's a lot of brushing. It's not going to be any different than if you just brush for 10 seconds, 20 seconds. So don't think you need to sit there for a super long time with a nylon brush.
Not to get in like the nitty gritty, but brush lengths and how much pressure you apply on roto brushing.
So the roto brushes we use are the 70 mil Pro brushes from Swix. They're really good because you can mix and match which ones you have on there. So you can pull the handle off, swap in a 70 mil brush. I didn't have any with me at home. Like I said, it's kind of hard to bring everything from the truck here, but those Pro brushes are great because you can just take one off, put a new one on. So if you have a horsehair brush already on, then you take off the nylon, put the steel one on for the melt-on stuff. But it's just paying attention to the ski and making sure you don't have any of those dull like sections on there. And that's when I would tell you you're done brushing, is when you don't see any more of those dull sections on the ski.
Could you quickly go over the brushing sequence for hard and liquid waxes?
Hard waxes, we do a steel and a horsehair brush. Liquid waxes, we do nylon and a horsehair brush. And again, we use those Swix 70 mil ones. They're just great to just pop on and off. The Red Creek brushes have them together, and you just pull both of them together. They're glued together. I think Toko has 100 mil brushes that work. But yeah, for the most part, that's what we use. Those are those Pro brushes from Swix.
You're brushing off liquid.
Yep, almost always.
I thought you mentioned fleece earlier for.
That's where we're going next. So the other roto tools that we use is going to be fleeces and wools and corks. For the longest time, it used to just be a cork and a fleece. So the fleece meaning the short hair felts that you see, wool meaning the long bushy white pieces that you've started to see more of now. The kind of idea behind it was that cork is going to heat and smooth the surface, so it works better for cold conditions. The felt is got a little bit more scruff to it. It's going to add a little bit more microstructure, making it typically better for warmer, wetter conditions. That was always kind of that. When we would go to cold conditions, it would almost always be cork. When we go to warm conditions, it would almost always be felt. It has kind of not been that way since the wool came out. We've almost completely switched. Like 85% of it is going to the wool. I don't know why. Other than it tests well and we've just adopted that. So now we're testing wool and felt, and we've almost gotten rid of all of our corks. In my head, and this is again just a thought or a hypothesis of mine, is that at such a high RPM, so we're brushing with impact drills on the wools at 3,600 RPM, that wool, essentially the centrifugal force sticks straight out and creates a block under that force. When it's not brushing or not spinning, it's pretty squishy and soft and you can manipulate it, but when it's spinning, it's a full solid block, so it's smoothing really well, but it's also adding some minute amounts of microstructure to the ski, which helps it for both cold and for warm. I have no idea if that's actually true, but that's kind of just in my head, that's how I see it working.
What's the drill brand that's in 3,600 RPMs?
The Milwaukee M18 red system.
Is that a cordless or?
It is. But yeah, that's kind of our drilling or our tools side of things. We use driver drills, so lower RPM for paraffin pipe waxes. It's again, if it was our choice, we'd probably just do impact, but that's what we've had in the past is drivers, and that's what we have right now. If I was going to suggest something for you guys, it would probably be an impact drill for everything. But since we have the driver drills, we just use those for the paraffin side of things because it's less important about the RPM and more about just getting the wax out. Whereas with the wool, it is about that RPM. It is about how fast it goes. And so using the wool with a higher RPM drill and then your brushes with a lower RPM drill is what I use currently. But if you have the opportunity to just use 2 high RPM drills, that's what I would do.
So it's liquid, you said you go nylon, horsehair,
than nylon.
horsehair than that, okay.
Yep.
And then you test the fleece or you always use that?
We test the wool.
The wool, I mean.
Yeah, and it just depends on the brand that we use. So some brands react well to the wool, some brands don't. Some brands are just let it dry and be done with it. So like Toko side of things are great to just dry, brush. The Swick stuff in the HS line is the same: dry, brush, ski. Start and Rex are more of the dry, wool, brush, ski. So you're brushing after the wool application just as a polishing phase to the ski.
But still using the horsehair.
My understanding or kind of the reasoning behind that is the carrying solvent. So these two are more butane based, longer dry times. If you wool and brush, it maybe doesn't get as dry as just letting it sit there. So I find that if we're more patient, maybe after 20 minutes, if we had one with just brushed and one with wool, it'd be a little bit different, but it's still so close. Whereas these 2 brands will use an isopropyl solvent. They'll dry 3 to 5 minutes, and that curing time needs to be activated. So that's why we use the wool for those isopropyl solvent based liquids. And typically we just let the butane based solids just dry.
Is there any benefit to letting it dry for like longer than? Like,
As long as you
start off
can,
overnight?
any of the liquids, as long as you can give them to rest and to sit, the better it'll be. That being said, it's hard to know what's going to work tomorrow. And if I put it on all my skis and I was like, cool, I'm ready to go, and then it loses by 3 ski lengths, we'd be like, well, crap. Even if I let it sit overnight, it's still not gonna be that good. So that's why our overnight waxes, we're almost always trying to predict what might work. Because in the event that we don't have time to wax a ski for whatever reason, maybe it was a super complex day of kick waxing, we already have something really safe on our ski that we could just say structure, liquid wax, goes. We have a super safe option on there. It's going to be functioning and good. So
Following with another question, for citizens, we have, let's say, the weather is stable, the conditions are known, and we're not competing for millimeters or centimeters like we do. Would it then be okay to kind of apply the liquid wax the night before carrying the ski on, to give it 24 hours or more to spend?
Absolutely. Yeah, if you,
It's like a lot of that G41 for Leo and.
Yeah.
So we just have like. Put it on the-
so that was one of our 2 Minneapolis waxes, when we were there, for the World Cup. Yeah, we used one of the test waxes from these guys one of the days. And then we used this NF41, the newer version. These are all different carriers than that G series line of Rex. So then those will have that butane solvent, which you can just let dry, and they kind of need the overnight.
Yeah.
Whereas the NF series is all isopropyl based. You don't need as long to dry. Any other?
I feel like there was any changes in prepping new skis, or is that kind of just the traditional approach is fine, and that's kind of, you're just building up that base?
Yeah, so the question was prepping new skis, and what you do to that. For the most part, that was one of the few tests we just got done doing in Dockstone on the glacier. We have a second truck now, it's a grinding truck, that we were working on, and we didn't do a ton of testing, but we did a couple of just freshly ground skis. And what's gonna be durable to new skis? Is it gonna be, do I need to put 4 layers on before I can start race waxing the ski? Do I need to put 1 layer on and start race waxing skis? Oddly enough, just 2 layers of blue is better than like 3 layers of blue plus a hardener. I think when you get to too hard of a wax right away with new skis, so if you go from like a fresh ski to a green, it's not adhering, it's not hardening that base properly, it's just kind of shearing off. We used just 2 layers of CH6, and that worked better than a layer of CH6 and a layer of CH5. And it worked better than a layer of CH6 mixed with a hardening powder. So like a Toko X cold powder mixed with it to help harden the base. Didn't work as well. So just put on 2 layers of blue and then start race waxing. Was sufficient for us. As easy as that sounds, it's weird. Because for me, I was like, that shouldn't work.
What do you name the new truck?
Huh?
What do you name the new truck?
Manny was my understanding of Manny. But I think there's also the name Nelson is getting floated out right now. But that was actually a really funny story because one of our Estonian wax techs he just went to the Swiss biathlon team, and he texted us. He's like, "You guys named the truck Nelson?" And we're like, "We did." And he sent us a news article, and he's like, "And the US ski team, with the addition of a new truck, hired now Bernie Nelson." And he's like, "You guys named it Nelson? That's a weird name." And we're like, no, in English, this comma is a pause, not a continuation of the sentence. And he's like, oh.
It's actually one of our wax techs.
Yes.
Burning sheets, yeah, he used to be the development coach.
Yeah, so our new wax tech, Bernie Nelson, might have the truck named after her, after one of our Estonians didn't understand English.
We should probably wrap it up pretty quick here.
Yeah, unless anyone else has questions, I've kind of covered on all the glide stuff. If you do have questions, just come see me afterwards. I'll be here.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.